Joseph Aoun. Joseph.
It took over 2 years, but finally, Lebanon has a new president.
I swear to respect the constitution and laws of the Lebanese nation and to preserve the independence and territorial integrity of the Lebanese nation.
On January 9th, in front of a gathering of MPs, Joseph Aoun took the oath of office. He declared a new phase of Lebanon's history, adding,
I vow to work for a country that invests in its army to control the borders and contribute to their consolidation in the south and their demarcation in the east, north and sea. I vow to prevent smuggling, fight terrorism, preserve the unity of Lebanese territory, implement international resolutions, respect the truce agreement, and prevent Israeli attacks on Lebanese territory. An army with a doctrine.
In the same speech, he also mentioned the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah, without mentioning the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah.
My pledge is to exercise my role as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and Chairman of the Supreme Defense Council, through which I will work to affirm the state's right to monopolize the bearing of arms.
This week, who is Joseph Aoun? What will be his priorities, and what are the challenges he will have to face? And following their war with Israel, where does Hezbollah stand in this new phase of Lebanon's history? My name is Hugo Goodridge, and you're listening to The New Arab Voice. Lebanon had been without a president for 2 years, 2 months, and 9 days. During that time, the country's economic situation continued to deteriorate. Efforts to hold people to account for the deadly port blast stuttered and disintegrated. And Israel launched a devastating air and ground campaign that levelled buildings, killed hundreds, and forced thousands from their homes. Lebanon really did need a new president. And now they have one. Enter Joseph Aoun. You might not have heard of Joseph Aoun before, but he has been knocking around for some time now. Fundamentally, Aoun is a military man. He enrolled in the Lebanese Armed Forces in 1983 and served in the Commando Regiment, which he later went on to lead. In 2015, he was made the head of the 9th Infantry Brigade and deployed on the border with Israel. In March 2017, he rose to the top when he was named as Commander-in-Chief of the Lebanese Armed Forces. During his time as Commander-in-Chief, he led battles against the Islamic State and al-Nusra fighters on the border with Syria, and also led the Lebanese Armed Forces through Israel's recent invasion. Joseph Aoun is considered to be an effective military commander, but does that make him a good choice for president? To find out, I spoke with Paul Salem, the Vice President for International Engagement at the Middle East Institute.
First of all, the reaction of the majority of the Lebanese public has been very positive. He did get almost a unanimous vote in parliament. That doesn't automatically mean, that means he's a very good choice, but it does indicate the enthusiasm and the support he got. I myself do think he is a timely choice for president for a number of reasons. One is he was the head of the army and he remains as president, the commander-in-chief. The army has a major task to implement the ceasefire agreement brokered by the U.S. with Israel, and beyond that to secure the eastern borders as well after the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. So the army has a particular role to play and to regain control of Beirut airport and Beirut port. As head of the army, he has been an effective, as far as anybody can tell, clean commander of that army, and he has understood also some of the basic complexities of Lebanese politics. It's not an easy country to be president of. He also he's well known in the region and internationally, and since Lebanon will need a lot of regional and international support, yes, it's good to have somebody in the presidency who's also well known and generally trusted. So yes, for those reasons, I think he is a good choice.
You mentioned that he needs to recontrol the borders with Syria, the airports, Israel, Lebanon, ceasefire, overseeing that. What other priorities are there going to be for him as the new president? And what's going to prevent him, do we think, from achieving those priorities?
Well, we could see, I mean, he's already facing, the country's already facing the difficulty of dealing with a Hezbollah, which is still dragging its feet on the withdrawal from Litani. It sent some of its thugs into the streets of Beirut over the last couple of days. It is claiming that they won. They're really not sort of adapting or adjusting to the new status quo. So the first challenge is making sure that the ceasefire actually holds and is, the withdrawal from both sides, Hezbollah and Israel, takes place. Israel, of course, itself has been dragging its feet and not withdrawing according to the schedule. So that deadline has been extended to February 18th. So that's the first obvious challenge that he has to deal with on the sovereignty and security front. And then further down the road, still on the sort of sovereignty security front, the agreements that Lebanon has agreed to include, he had it in his inauguration speech, that the state has to regain a monopoly of the use of force, which means that Hezbollah and any other armed groups, including the Palestinians in the camps, need to give up their arms or integrate somehow, into the state and into the army, and that is a major challenge as well. Now, on the political and economic side, obviously, there's formation of the government is a big challenge. Once the government is formed, there are those issues that we mentioned. Then there's a slew of economic, banking, investment, reconstruction. There's so much that the government has to deal with.
You mentioned Hezbollah. You mentioned, they're claiming victory from their recent war, dragging its feet on withdrawal north of the Litani River. Prior to this war, I think it's fair to say they were quite a formidable force within Lebanon, militarily speaking. Are they still an effective military force, or has the recent war, plus the fall of Assad, plus Iran's weakened state, ended its ability to work and operate as a strong military force within the country?
I think they're definitely able to still operate within the country because they are really they're the only militia in the country, other than some of the small Palestinian militias in Palestinian camps. But the other groups in the country and the communities, as part of the Taif agreement, all disarmed their militias, and Hezbollah did not. So they are very, very weakened vis-a-vis Israel, but they are still very, very scary and powerful vis-a-vis other Lebanese groups. Of course, the army is the one that is tasked with maintaining stability and security in the country, and generally it has been able to do that. But the army cannot and does not want to get into a direct war with Hezbollah, because Hezbollah also is the main political party representing the Shiite community, which is about a third of the country. So you don't want to risk civil war. So yeah, they're still very powerful, and I mean, part of their claims of victory and this kind of theatrics that they're doing, some of it is to try to maintain their credibility and their appeal in front of their own people, in their own sort of community, which has suffered greatly. Part of it is to signal to Iran that we're still here, send us money, help us out, we're not giving up. And part of it is to put pressure on other communities and on the prime minister and the president to get a better deal in the formation of the government. I don't think it's going to go beyond that. I think this is somewhat, politics and theatrics, but it is obstructing progress.
If they are, say, neutered more militarily speaking, particularly when it comes to confronting Israel, does this mean that sort of more efforts and more resources can be funneled into the political wing and they can become politically stronger over the next term of parliament?
I mean, the main problem they're facing in terms of being politically well, not politically more powerful. They are politically extremely powerful, but right now they're in a very difficult position vis-a-vis their people. And it's pretty clear they're worried about upcoming local elections, about upcoming parliamentary elections. And what they need most is money to funnel back into the country to reconstruct the destroyed villages and neighborhoods of their communities largely, which is south, the southern suburbs, and the Bekaa. And their fight to get into the government is that they want to be able to control or have a handle on that money that's coming in, and they want to be the ones distributing it so that come election time they can say, hey, we got you money and we rebuilt your homes and villages. So they want to rebuild their client network, if you will. The problem is if they remain in this confrontational, obstructive, armed status that they're currently insisting to keep, the money is not going to come to them or to anybody else, and they're not going to be able to reconstruct those towns and villages, and they're going to have a real problem with their people. So that's the
Or
conundrum
do you
they're
think they
in.
will get the money? Do you think they'll be able to put that client network aside and help those people?
I mean, the way things are shaping up, of course, we don't exactly know what the government is going to look like, but it looks like that they will have a presence in the government somewhere.
Mm.
And I think we'll end up in a kind of a halfway situation with their presence in the government and with the Amal movement in the government. There's going to be, let's say, limited trust and limited enthusiasm from the Arab countries or the international community to provide major support. I think we could then see a certain level of support. Exactly what that is, I don't think it's going to be enormous. So I think they will have a problem
Mm.
because it's not going to be enough money and it's not going to come in at the levels they need it. But at the same time, I mean, the only way for them to get around that is for them not to be in the government. And then the money will pour in, but then they worry that they're not going to be able to control it. They're not going to be able to translate into votes. So they're kind of in this catch-22 situation where they're sitting.
Mm. It's always useful for a president and a prime minister and a government as a whole to be supported by the people that they govern over. The Lebanese citizens, they've had a particularly rough time there over the past few years, even before the war, going all the way back a number of years now, with the economic struggles and the port blast and many other issues. Does this new government of Aoun and the new Prime Minister Salam, do they have the support of the Lebanese people, or maybe the Lebanese people just happy for something, having waited for so long? At this point, any sort of government will be good government.
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not any government. The people were very excited about the election of Aoun and his inauguration speech. Very, very powerful and popular. A majority of the people were very excited about the nomination of the international judge, Nawaf Salam. And now there are these uncertainties about what is going to be the shape of the new government. And so it can run the range from a very impressive government with excellent people in it, new faces, a strong team, to which then the public will react very, very enthusiastically, and hopefully the international community as well, or a government which is a portion between all the traditional parties and different quotas for different parties, which the public will not be very enthusiastic about. And the same applies to the international community, that they're waiting to see. They were happy with the president, happy with the prime minister. The third test is what's the government going to look like? And we don't have enough clarity on that now.
What's your feeling about which way the makeup of the government will go?
My feeling is that it will be somewhere in between. Is that it will have to accede to some of the realities in the country and the parties. Those parties are the ones that are in parliament and will control the vote of confidence. And it is a constitutional system. So definitely there's going to be a share representation. And I also think there will be some appointments in the government, some ministries which will not follow that rule and will be maybe choices of the prime minister himself or the prime minister and the president, ministers who are not part or beholden to a party, and those. So I think it'll be kind of a hybrid, and I think the reaction will also be hence hybrid or mixed. Like I imagine there will be some good things in it and some enthusiasm publicly, but maybe not as much as as idealistic as some people wanted it to be.
Lebanon, as we mentioned, economically speaking, very weak at the moment. Reconstruction, they need a lot of help. One place that help could come from is from the international community. If that help from the international community does come, what are the most likely candidates from the international community to provide that help? And then following on, what are those countries going to want in return for that help?
Yeah, I mean there's two baskets, as it were. There is the reconstruction of the South, which is a particular, that's just, reconstruction money and aid, and, that's not investment. That is, countries offering money to rebuild towns and villages. That is going to be a tough sell because of the politics that goes along with it. That most of them, the most of the money that's available, of course, is in the Gulf. That just happens to be where most money is. Iran doesn't have much money. The US and the West and the Arab countries are not, and Israel is not going to be, they will try to block Iran if it had money to play any major role, and they don't want Iran to get back to Lebanon. So that's an obstacle in itself. And the Arab countries will not be enthusiastic about providing massive reconstruction aid if Hezbollah is insisting on continuing the role it played before. So there's a challenge there that, it's going to be very hard to overcome. And, reconstruction aid is not going to come in any major way from the US or Europe or, the international community or China. It would have to come from the Arab countries and maybe a few others. And that's going to be a hard challenge. For the rest of the economy, what is really needed is not aid. It is basically quick reforms. There's a huge issue on rebuilding, reforming the banking system, which includes how do you deal with depositors' losses and that huge sort of thing that has to be dealt with. And then mergers and refloating of the banking system. The country needs electricity and a functioning or better functioning Wi-Fi system or telecommunications. I think the electricity and the telecoms, at least short term, can be done fairly. There are ways to do it kind of quickly, and then leave the longer term stuff for longer. The banking challenge is a much more difficult, and it's very political. But if those things are done, then you could just sit back effectively and let the economy, with Lebanese diaspora money, Gulf money rushing in to invest. So it doesn't need aid; it needs reform and let it rip.
Obviously, one of the biggest impacts that Lebanon has seen over the past 12 months has been Israel's war with Hezbollah. It wrought massive amounts of destruction on the capital and the southern parts of the country, also in the east, Baalbek. There's a ceasefire deal now, which involves withdrawals and whatnot. Can Aoun bring stability to the Israel-Lebanon border? And that's going to involve, I would imagine, Hezbollah's agreement, or certainly them not getting in the way. Can he bring that stability, and will they allow him to bring that stability?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's not. The question is about him, but obviously, it's a complex process. It will require, on the one side, Hezbollah agreeing to implement fully, which we're not sure they're yet convinced of. Maybe you can say part of this is jockeying for position before the formation of a government. Maybe once the government is formed and they're satisfied about their position in the government, maybe then they will change course, or implement more quickly and more efficiently. And then there's a completely separate question about Israel, which President Aoun can do very little about. Are they really committed, and are they going to really implement a full withdrawal? They said they were in the last days of the Biden administration. We'll have to see how their relations with the incoming Trump administration are. I know that for the incoming government in Lebanon, once it's formed, a big task there is to coordinate with the Americans to make sure that the Israelis do live up to their commitments on the Israeli side. And then, President Aoun and the government making sure Hezbollah lives up to its commitments on the Lebanese side, and then the army can really move in. So it's not a done deal, but I do think it is possible that this could be achieved. If it is achieved, then we must immediately move on to negotiations to settle the land border between Lebanon and Israel and any remaining points of disagreement, the small ones, but important ones. And once that is done, and once Lebanon can declare that there's no longer any occupied territory in Lebanon, no Lebanese territory occupied by Israel. Once Lebanon can declare that officially and fully, then the issue of Hezbollah's arms can more effectively be put on the table.
Okay. Aoun's got some pretty ambitious goals for Lebanon. He laid them out in his speech when he was declared president. The constitution in Lebanon does not grant him total authority over everything. So as president, does he actually have the powers to see through the goals that he set out and what he wants to achieve? Or is this going to be a case of he says it and everyone goes, well, that does sound good, but Parliament actually turns around and goes, yeah, well, we're not going to do that. Can he persuade Parliament to achieve those goals for him?
You're right. I mean, in terms of the Constitution, the president is part of the executive authority, but he's not the chief executive. So that needs to be made very clear. Executive authority is vested in the Council of Ministers as a collective body. And the Council of Ministers is presided over by the Prime Minister, but also the President can chair sessions of Council of Ministers when he chooses. So it's a kind of a complex system. The importance of his inauguration speech is that he laid out his goals for his 6-year presidency. These are goals. Parliament voted for him, and then he laid out these goals in front of Parliament, and you can say informally, Parliament sort of, approved or with approbation, they approved his goals, and the goals were highly sort of approved in the country in general. You can also say that the incoming prime minister fully adopted and took on board what the president laid out as goals. And I imagine when the government is formed and it writes its government policy statement, it will very much coincide with, abide by what he set out as goals. So the goals he set out, hopefully, will unroll as the goals of the state over the next few years. Much of that implementation is up to the Council of Ministers as the executive authority. There are some things that require legislation or approval of Parliament. And hopefully, by setting the tone in that way, things will go in that direction. But yes, he's not an executive president, so he cannot just do it himself.
Okay. Clientelism, corruption, big problems in Lebanon. There have been for years and years and years. They are deeply entrenched within the country, particularly within its political system, but they've filtered down throughout the country. Can Aoun do anything about these? Or are they too sort of embedded, despite, what he said when he was inaugurated? Do we have hope that he's actually going to try and do something about it? And obviously there's a lot of people who benefit from those systems. So, what might they do to stop those changes to these corrupt systems?
Corruption and clientelism, they exist on a wide, let's call it a spectrum, and there's all kinds of that kind of, there's all kinds of corruption, all kinds of clientelism. it's a systemic and very complicated and ingrained set of problems. I think, and it's not unique to Lebanon. There's many countries. I dare say the U.S. is moving into that territory very boldly, but certainly a lot of developing countries. And the challenge of reducing corruption and fighting corruption has to be a key part, really, of the prime minister and the government's tasks, with support from the president, sure, and support from parliament. And it requires, legislation. It requires building new institutions of the state, new procedures. Digitization of government procedures often helps. Establishing ombudsman, bringing more transparency to government operations in general. So it's kind of a whole of government. It's a very necessary, very multi-dimensioned effort that needs to be done, and it needs to be a key pillar or a key goal for the incoming government. It will find support from the president, but it's not something the president can do. But yeah, it's something the government has to work on seriously, and one must be realistic. One is not going to eliminate corruption anytime soon, but reducing it substantially, reducing where it happens, particularly reducing big corruption, multi-million-dollar deals and so on. That's different than, a local poor official whose, salary is, $90 a month, who maybe takes a $5 bribe to, corruption. There are different sizes of it. There's $100 million contracts, and there's the poor, local official who's taking a $5 bribe on the side. They're all important, but some are more important than others.
Paul, thank you very much. This episode of The New Arab Voice was written and produced by me, Hugo Goodrich. Our theme music was by Omar El Phil. The New Arab Voice will be back shortly with a new episode. Until then, you can find all our previous episodes on all major podcast platforms. You can check out our social media accounts at TNA Podcasts for additional content. And you can email us, podcast@newarab.com. That's podcast@newarab.com. You can subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And you can also rate and review, which helps us spread the word. Don't forget to follow The New Arab on Facebook, X and Instagram for all the latest news, analysis and opinion from the region.